Welcome to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. I'm your host, Fabian motherfucking Ojeda, and I don't know shit, but that's okay. All right, let's get this shit started. Thank you everybody for listening to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed episode number 13 with Bernardo Hernandez of Dreams Bridal. Definitely a fun episode there. I want to have him and his partner back on, talk about the quinceañera world a little bit more, but also talk about that psychic world. I was interested, that piqued my curiosity there. Quick update for the podcast. We're now on iHeartRadio, so if that's your preferred platform, you're in luck, because we're there, so go ahead and spread the word. So we're back with a new guest for episode number 14. She's a hardworking mother. She's someone who plays by her own rules. And she's got a decent taste in music. Welcome to the podcast, Marissa Rascon. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Fabian. I'm super stoked to be here and join you today. So, I'm doing awesome.
Definitely. And you're someone I really wanted to have on because, you know, I've known you for a while now. You're very animated. I know you're not going to be a boring conversation, you know?
No, I'm not a boring person at all, man.
No. And I think we have a pretty cool topic to talk about because we know a lot about it, you know, after school program, education, and then just a big kind of mess we were involved in, but we'll get we'll get to that. So besides work, how's quarantine 2020 been for you?
You know what? I'll be honest with you, like in the beginning, because the quarantine started on kind of like a surreal, like, whoa, is this really happening? And so I think it started, I don't want to say fun. I feel like fun is the wrong word, but it was new, right? So it was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. So I think I fell into like the same as everybody else, like, oh, I'm home, I'm going to do all these new things and I can clean my house now and I have all this extra time. So like it started that way, right? But I feel like now it's kind of gotten darker, right? It's gotten more real, obviously a lot scarier. So I think now, currently, my current state with quarantine is just a lot of like disbelief, right? Because I just kind of feel like I've never experienced anything like this before in my entire life. So just right now, I just really want to focus on like within quarantine. I just focus on being with my husband, my daughter. I try to keep as sane as I possibly can because our house is hot, right? It's summertime. Like this is the worst time to be quarantined at home for people, right? And then especially because, during the summertime is when, you go, out places and you're with your family. And like now you have to ask yourself like, well, am I risking, my grandmother's life if I go and see her, right? And then, so that's difficult, right? But, so it's just a lot of staying home. I don't want to go and like expose myself or, my husband or my daughter. Both my husband and I are essential workers. So we're already out in the public. So when we don't need to be, we're home, right? And we just stay home and watch a lot of TV and sweat our asses off in a hot ass house, right? But that's just kind of where it's at now. In the beginning, it was a lot of like, oh, I get to work from home and I'm going to get so much sleep. But it's not that. I think the novelty of quarantine, like, again, I feel fucked up for saying that, but I feel like the novelty of quarantine is kind of worn off.
Well, it's history. We're living through history. This is what's going to be in textbooks. Like, you don't live through that very often, and I think novelty might be the right word to say because at first it is kind of like a novelty type of thing. Like, whoa, like this is like, something brand new and we've never experienced this before. But you're right, it has turned kind of dark. And that's something I talked to my last guest about, 2 guests ago now on the podcast. And she talked about how, same thing you were saying, people are rediscovering passions and hobbies and whatnot. But now, you start seeing that cabin fever kick in. People are getting upset. People are no longer in this happy-go-lucky kind of mood because there's no end to it in sight just yet. They kind of dangled the carrot in front of us a little bit and said like, hey, we're back to normal almost. But we kind of screwed that up. you know?
Yeah.
And now we're back to almost square one, you know? So,
and then I always trip out too, like on people, like, okay, so like for me, it's just my husband and my daughter and I that live at home. There's some people who have like 12 people living in one freaking house, man. Like, they're going insane. They're going insane, right? It's just crazy.
Well, we'll see if there's an end to it at any point. So, before we get started, I want to give you a quick rundown of the topics. We kind of did a little bit already. But we'll talk about your history and backstory a little bit. I like to do that for all guests. We'll move on to a huge mess and controversy we were involved in the after-school world. We'll involve social media in our conversation about higher education. And then we'll close out with something fun, a little bit of music talk.
Okay.
So let's get started with your history and backstory. So like I said, I like to give my listeners just a sense of who you are, where you grew up, and how it made you you. You know, a lot of my friends were on the podcast, and we grew up in Almani. So our little hashtag for that is, you know, growing up Almani. But you didn't grow up in Almani, but I'm sure you grew up nearby.
Yes. So I'm actually a born and raised California girl. Yep. So I was born up in Santa Rosa, California. So that's up in the wine country. But I was raised in Alhambra. So that's been my whole life, right? Like, I mean, yeah, I've been lucky to travel, you know. I've been, you know, have a pretty good, you know, list of places that I've traveled to, but I'm an Alhambra girl. I went to school in Alhambra my whole life, went to Alhambra High School. I still live in Alhambra. My daughter is going to all the same schools I went to, and she's about to start at Alhambra High this fall. But very, very proud, a California girl all the way. I was actually raised by my grandmother. So my father had so he passed away when I was about 4 years old, and my mom just had a different agenda for her life, right? So she really lived an adventurous life, full of craziness. And so, and it didn't really fit with taking care of kids. So my grandmother and my grandfather adopted me, and my grandmother raised me. And, you know, she's still kicking. I love my grandmother. She's an amazing, healthy woman, 93 years old, still drives a car, still, you know, maintains her home. And she was actually born in California as well, but grew up in Mexico right along with my grandfather. So they came to California in the like 40s, 50s, went ahead and, you know, they were one of the first Mexican families in Alhambra, you know, back in the 50s. And you know, they raised their family here. And so all of my, you know, my aunts and my uncles, all, you know, grew up to be incredibly successful people, college students. My grandmother and my grandfather started with not knowing any English. And, you know, my grandmother now, like, you know, through the years, they ended up purchasing more properties. They put their kids through college. So it's just, it's a really cool, you know, place to come from, right? And so I was able to grow up with my grandmother sharing with me all of her cool stories. Well, to her, there were stories of like, you know, adversity, right? But to the person listening, it's like, wow, you did that as a kid, you know, growing up on the streets of Zacatecas and, you know, Chihuahua and everything. So, yeah, like my grandmother raised me and my brother. And, yeah, basically that. I mean, we traveled a lot. All of my family they're all educators. My aunt's a nurse. My grandmother was a teacher. My aunts are teachers. So my whole life, I was basically conditioned to become somebody who worked in education, right? Like from the time that I was 13 years old, my grandmother was the youth minister at our church, and I started teaching when I was 13. I had my own Sunday school class, and from then on, you know, every summer I would go and be a TA for my aunt who would do summer school. And so I was always like, you're going to be a teacher. You're going to be a teacher. And I was always like, I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a teacher. Until I got into high school. Right. And then I kind of started discovering some new things about me. And, it's funny. I had actually told my grandmother when I was a junior, that I wanted to go into, makeup design, and I wanted to open my own salon. And she told me, she's like, no. She goes, no. She goes, I don't think so. If you think you're going to do that, I'm going to write you out of the will. Like that's how like strict she was about me going into education. So it just, so yeah.
So who was Marissa in high school? You know, everybody has like their group that they fit into, the jock, the nerd, you know. I'm not thinking
I was into grunge.
I was going to say, maybe you were the rocker kid, right? Wearing chucks and everything.
Yeah, I wore Doc Martens.
Okay, that's even more grunge right there.
Yes, I was like, I loved, but we'll get into music after. But yeah, and I was a total grunge kid. But believe it or not, I didn't hang with grunge kids.
Oh, okay.
My high school group was very, I guess a better way to say it is like we were very diverse, right? Mm-hmm. We had jocks, we had band kids, we had theater kids. I was a choir kid. Mm-hmm. We had cheerleaders, like all of us. It was a big group of us, and everybody was different. We were all incredibly different. From all different little, archetypes of high school. Yeah. So, yes, I was a rocker kid, but I didn't hang out in the traditional rocker kid group. Right. My best friend was on Flags. So it was definitely a diverse group.
Yeah. You don't see that too much. I think, my group of friends in high school was pretty much just the kids that did wrestling. We were all on the team together, and we're still friends now, Yeah. But yeah, you don't see that too much. How do you think that helped turn you into who you are now? Because I know you're very social. It's not easy. I mean, it's not hard for you to get up in front of a group of people, right? So how do you think that helped mold you into you?
Well, it's funny you say that, because when I was a senior, when we did the senior favorites, I was voted most outgoing. So I think that my energy has. So everybody always tells me about my energy, right? Everybody's like, Marissa, I love your energy. You've heard that, baby man. Yeah. I think I've always had this energy. I've always been very, I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I've always been very charismatic, yeah. Right? Like I've always been very, like the way that I talk to you now, that was me when I was 12, 9, like I've always been like, hi, I'm Marissa, right? That's always just been my energy. So I think that because of that, that is what allowed me in high school to have the diverse friend group that I did, because of that social confidence that I guess I've always had. I've always been a social butterfly. It's always been very easy for me to, make friends and connect with people. And so I think in high school, having that diverse background, of friends, right? Because it wasn't necessarily that way in middle school. Right. But I attribute that to middle school. Middle schoolers are, tunnel vision, right?
Yeah.
But I think that because I'm so like friendly with everybody, and when I love you and I connect with you and I dig your energy, I don't care if you're a jock or a cheerleader or anybody, I'm going to just want to like be around you. And I think it's that way reciprocated. I think when people meet me, regardless of how like weird or, how different I may be from that person, like we just want to connect, right? I'm just a kinetic energy type person. Nice. So I think the diversity in high school probably allowed me to spread that energy more, because I was able to like, tap into different groups of friends that I had, and then their groups of friends, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, the energy thing must be kind of exhausting, right? You ever have like an off switch? Like, I know, like, for me personally, like, I can get up in front of a group and I can put the on switch on, and, you might see me, like, besides that, like, if I'm not in front of a group, I might be, like, keep to myself, very quiet. I like being a loner a lot of the times, to be honest with you. But when I'm in front of a group training them, or with, like, a group of kids or whatever, then the personality comes out, So, you ever find an off switch for that?
Oh, God. Not an off switch. So it's not an off switch for me because it's who I am. But I do get incredibly exhausted. I think for me, it's not. So, and I would say instead of it being an off switch, it's more like a tank. Okay. And it just depletes.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that when I get really stressed out, or when I get really disappointed, overwhelmed, right? It's harder for me to tap into that tank, just like it turns off, right? Like I'm not. And then what ends up happening is I have a lot of people, I experience this all the time at YPI. Even now, like I've always experienced people telling me, Marissa, I love your energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like people become dependent on it.
Right.
And that's what's exhausting. Because it's like, I feel like I should be able to have like a low key day like anybody else, right? Like I should just be able to be like aloof and not intentionally. It's just, sometimes your energy levels are lower than other days.
Right.
But I feel like people don't allow me that. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, especially in a work setting.
Right.
At home, totally different. Like, it's my husband, it's my space, it's my daughter, like, different story. But at work, and in school settings, I always feel like I've never been allowed to, I don't want to say have a bad day, but I've never been allowed not to be on. Right? And that's what's exhausting, because since the energy is natural for me, and the, me being Marissa, my spirit is natural for me. Mm-hmm. When you're telling me like, oh, your spirit, I'm like, dude, like, that's just my personality, man. Like, what I mean? Like, everybody has different, like, levels to their personality, but I feel like people almost depend on me to be that positivity that they want. And I'm kind of like, dude, find that in yourself, right? Like, like, I shouldn't have to be your clown, because sometimes it feels like that.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, sometimes does it kind of feel like almost like like you're playing a character, like a novelty, Like, and I know it's genuinely you, but sometimes when it gets to that point. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit. In a little bit, we'll talk about after school programs, and we'll talk about education and college and whatnot. But did you try any other career paths before getting into after school?
Oh God. Well, when I was a senior in high school, because I grew up in the church with my grandmother. I mentioned before she was worked with children. So I was very, very involved in church my whole life, growing up with my grandmother. So when I was a senior in high school, I knew I wanted to work with kids. I knew I wanted to work with people. I knew I wanted to be in the service, to people. But it actually, I really wanted to be a youth pastor. So, all through like my, senior year, like I worked my ass off because I really wanted to get into Azusa Pacific University and, be a part of the youth ministries department. And I wanted to be a youth minister. I knew I wanted to work with teens. I wanted to work with kids. And because of my, upbringing, that was something that, I really wanted to get involved in. And I think what I really loved about it was like the mentorship to students. And I really love, and I'll get into that after when we get into after school, but I love the freedom that youth leaders, youth workers have with connecting with children versus a teacher, right? Like teachers have to follow, guidelines and standards, and there's goals and there's benchmarks. And I love just being able to connect with some kids, right? And I think that youth ministry really spoke to me in that way. And then I was also very involved in my youth group, right? That was my outlet with friends. My grandmother didn't really allow me to spend too much time with school friends. Right. I was never allowed to like spend the nights over. Okay. I was never allowed to like just casually go to my friends' houses often or anything like that. She was really, really strict with me. So youth group became my social outlet, and all of my friends from school went to youth group. So it worked out. Right. Yeah. But I didn't get into Azusa Pacific University. And so I decided to go to Citrus because I was like, well, it'll be easy for me to transfer to Azusa from Citrus. And so I started my college journey at Citrus, but I moved out of my grandmother's house and I stopped going to church, and I moved in with my mom, and I became a young 20-something-year-old. And suddenly youth ministry was not a life that I was living, right? Like, and I had a really bad experience with my church when I graduated. And so the church actually is the one who completely turned me off to the church and turned me away from youth ministry because of that experience. And so that was the biggest major like career path prior to me going into after school. So I feel like it kind of naturally led to that. I knew I wanted to work with kids. But I think I just hadn't found what pocket I was going to fall into yet.
Okay.
And then the other thing is too, is that when I graduated from high school, and literally I graduated, went to grad night, and the very next day I started my first job with Parks and Recreation, and that's after school sports and cheer and summer camps. So I jumped right into after school before it was the traditional, what we see now after school. Does that make sense?
Right. And it's in that same realm, you know?
Yes.
So you did Parks and Recreation Park. I always mix up the name. I always go by the TV show. But you worked other after school programs before going to YPI, right?
Yes. So I was at Parks and Rec for 5 years, and that's where I did do after school sports. And that was in Alhambra. And I loved it because I was a product of Parks and Rec. Because in Alhambra, they put rec leaders at each school site. Okay. So they do after school, open drop-in type activities, right? So I was a product of that as a kid. And so I did that in Alhambra for 5 years. I ended up leaving because I needed to make a little bit more money. And then that's my crazy college 20s years and everything. So I won't get into that. But
that's another podcast, fell back, right?
Yeah, that's a totally different podcast. I ended up falling back into the after school realm when I went back to the workforce after my daughter was born. Because I took a break and I was in mental health for a while. I was a resident counselor for 5 years for a residential treatment facility in Rosemead for young girls.
Okay.
And so for a while there, I thought, maybe I'll stay in the mental health field. I knew right away that I wasn't going to stay in it. I just stayed. It was a good job, 5 years. I tend to stay at my places for 5 years. That's tends to be the cycle for me at jobs. I was there for 5 years. And the only reason I left it was because I had my daughter. But I knew I wasn't probably going to stay in that for very long. Mental health's a really tough field to be in.
It's very draining, right?
Yes. So when I had my daughter, this was in 2006, it was really important for me to stay home with my daughter the first year. It's something that everybody in all the women, my aunts, my grandmother, they really are big on staying home with your child, right, in the beginning. So I stayed home for the first year with my daughter. And within that first year, my mother had passed away. And that kind of shook my world.
Right.
And she ended up being the catalyst for me to return to school. And in returning to school, that's when I started getting hardcore back into okay, I'm going to become a teacher. I'm going to school to become a teacher. I had made the decision. I want to work with kids. I'm just going to be a teacher. So I went back to school. I started working on that. And I ended up getting hired by Options at a job fair. And it's funny because I went to the job fair with the intention for my husband to get a job. But I took resumes just, for shits and giggles. Yeah. So I was pushing around my stroller with my little girl, my baby. And I came across this table and they were looking for associate teachers. And I gave them my resume and I thought, they're not going to call me. I don't have a degree, you see the word teacher and you immediately associate, credentials, all that shit. So they gave me an interview right away and they hired me to be so for Options, what we call a youth leader, they call an associate teacher.
I see. Okay.
And what we call a site coordinator, they call a lead teacher.
Okay.
So I started as a associate teacher, right, as a youth leader. And I was there for 4 months before I promoted and got my own school site, and I became a lead teacher. Nice. So I would say Options is where I think I really jumped into the bucket of after school. Prior to that, it was just, I worked with kids and, shit was going on in my life and all this crap, right? But Options is where I really started to learn about funding and attendance and staffing. And it's because I had an amazing supervisor. And he's actually he's the reason I went to YPI because I followed him. And he, Max, Max?
I know Max.
Yeah, Max. Yeah, Max. And so that's where I met Max. And Max really, he's definitely a mentor. I so appreciate him. He's such an amazing professional. And I've learned so much from him. And so he's the one who really started educating me on what after school was. And I think it was in options where I saw after school as a field, right? Because prior to that, it took a while for, I think, after school to be acknowledged as an actual field.
Right.
Like everything is, focused around the teacher in the classroom. So when I got into options and I started with after school, I really fell in love with it because I got to create whatever I wanted to create to do with the students. And I loved that creativity and that flexibility there. And being able to connect with the students in a different way than how they connect with their teachers, right. And also with the parents, right? Mm-hmm. So that's definitely where I fell in love with after school, was in options. And that's when I decided that I was like, this is my field. This is where I want to be.
Yeah.
And so that's where it started for me.
And I like that you mentioned, how people kind of didn't take the field seriously. It's like a lot of people still see it, but more so back then, they saw it as like a daycare. I'm just going to drop the kids off for a few hours, exactly. Have them do their homework and that's it. But, I think at times, yes, we're the ugly redheaded stepchild of the school. We're the guests, we're the unwanted guests. And that's unfortunate. However, when you start to build good rapport and you start to show off what the kids can do in your program and you become an essential part of the school, the story changes a little bit. And that's the part of after school that I really like because I like that challenge. I've always gone into sites as a coordinator where, the admin's unhappy with what's going on. And I'm like, that's cool because I'll take that challenge, and we end up, winning them over. And it's not always an immediate victory, but when you do get them on your side and they like what you're doing, it's one of the sweetest victories because they went. You have this little chip on your shoulder, and that's helpful. I tell people all the time, that's fine. Be pissed off, like that kind of fuels you a little bit, but don't let it turn into the negativity where you're just going to be bitching and moaning about like, oh, my admin doesn't like me. The teachers don't like me. So make them like you, There's nothing in your way from creating something great when you have all the right tools. Now, sometimes though, and this is a perfect transition into what we're going to talk about, you don't have all the tools,
Agreed.
And we might get a little bit heated here talking about this subject, but I wanted to transition into the incredible mess that was YPI, where we worked, Youth Policy Institute. I want to say, to start off though, it wasn't always that way,
No.
And I think when I first got there, I heard about this incredible reputation they had in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley, highly touted by politicians, school districts, communities, parents, and the good, the good memories, the good stuff we were doing. I personally, enjoyed the fact that we got federal funding, because a lot of the times, you're used to just seeing the ACES grant, you're just used to seeing state funding. But the federal funding, where you could do, summers and non-school days, you could take field trips. There was money for busing and curriculum. I'm like, holy shit. Like if I'm painting, a beautiful mural of an after-school program here, and I'm limited to just the state funding, I can still make it happen. But when I saw all this other paint, shall we say, I started salivating. I'm like, holy shit, we can really do something here. And my first year with the company was amazing because, like I said, we came into a program that was not very well liked by admin and teachers, and we turned that into something great, and even had parents coming on board with us to every field trip and whatnot. So tell me about your good memories first and foremost with YPI.
So when I started with YPI, I started 5-6 years ago.
2013.
I had this 2013, yes. Yeah. And I had the same experience that you did in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So I came from an organization where all we had was ACES funding, right? So I didn't even know 21st century funding existed until I came to YPI. And so when I came to open up Wallace Annenberg. So Wallace Annenberg had sunsetted their 5-year grant, and they didn't get renewed. And so YPI went through the appeal process, and they ended up getting awarded back for WAS. And it just so happened that that was around the time that Max was leaving options and had transitioned over to YPI. And he was like, hey, there's positions here. You should really apply. So I went ahead and I applied. I went through the whole process. I interviewed the principal. It's funny, Eddie is actually the one who interviewed me. And so I ended up getting hired, and it was the same thing. I was like, oh my God, we get to take the kids on field trips? Yeah. Like, we never could do that at 8, with options. We would do one field trip in the summer, and that was it. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, wait, I get to hire all of these staff? I get to manage my budget? Yep. Like, oh my God, like, this was unheard of, Like, when I was at options with ACES money, during the summer, they would get the supplemental summer funding. Mm-hmm. So I had to supply my entire summer program with $79 for the summer. You know what I mean? Yeah. So to go from $79 for the summer to create your budget for the summer, and it was like
thousands.
What?
Yeah.
Thousands. Yeah. Thousands, right? So I remember in the beginning, I was spending that money, man. Like, I would order supplies, I was hiring staff, and we were getting everything, right? It was great. You would, of course, any, company has like little, quirks here and there, but in the beginning, it wasn't apparent. But then keep in mind too, in 2013, when we came into youth services, there's only like 30 sites.
Right.
YPI like exploded. Mm-hmm. God, this is a subject. So it exploded, right? And we just started seeing so much more money coming in, and like our events were elevated to like, I remember when I first came in, we would do the community jam, and it would be in this like tiny little, NPR that we would borrow from one of our schools, and and we went from that to doing these massive like conferences with thousands of people showing up, and huge events where like all of our schools are participating, and like you just saw all of this product and money, and oh, no problem, we want to buy all the kids backpacks for this event, let's do it. Oh, we want to buy all this for these schools, let's do it. And so I'd say in the first few years, I would almost say it was kind of like the golden era of YPI. I would say from like 2013 to probably 2018, I would say there was probably like this golden era for YPI. They got all this new funding, they bought all these new buildings.
I agree.
Yeah. And so I definitely think that. And
it wasn't just after school, it was like all the other services. Because I was just, I didn't even know how many services we provided, how many departments there were, And so when we had that, really strong reputation, it was from all the other stuff we were doing, the affordable housing, the early childhood and education, the free backpacks, the tax services, all of that, so we really were ingrained in the community. And I think it was a really essential thing to people who needed it,
Yeah.
But then, in my eyes, I'm very critical of things, so I know we did get a lot of cool stuff, I think, and I'm not, afraid to admit it, but I had a lot of bad supervisors early on. And so there was a lot of management where I'm just like kind of scratching my head. I'm like, who the hell hired you? Like, you can't even tie your own shoes. You know what I'm saying? So like, there was a lot of bad management, and I think, even as you go up the ladder, you start kind of scratching your head, like, why? Like, why are they there? And little things would kind of get my attention too. Where I was ordering a bunch of stuff and taking a bunch of field trips, I think everybody kind of saw it where you would order your stuff and be like, wait a minute, it's been 6 months. Wait a minute, it's been like almost a year. Where the hell's my stuff? So what that immediately, kind of screamed to me was, fiscal mismanagement, and I came from a company before that, who was very tight with their money, but it was secure. They would give you spending limits and say, this is how much you have to spend. And for reference, maybe for a middle school, it was about, $500 a month, which I thought was generous. but YPI, I could spend like $1,500, $2,000, whatever I wanted to spend, and nobody told me no. And that's the crazy part. And so,
but I think that like, on the same note though, Fabian, like, I think that it was because we budgeted for it, right? Like, the federal government, like, those grants are huge, right? And so I think it was easy for us to do that, to spend that money, because in essence, the money was supposed to be spent on the kids anyways.
Yes.
I think for me, what was, I'll let you finish your thought, and then I'll jump into what I was going to say.
Sure,
next. Go for it.
I think, where it was budgeted for, we didn't take into account that we weren't reaching 100% of our attendance.
Oh, yeah.
And, and I think that's one huge, huge, huge hit, because in our eyes, we're like, oh, we're getting all this money. It's like, no. You have to earn this money.
Yes.
And, and I think from there, too, where there was mismanagement of funds, there was also people who were kind of trying to cheat the system, who were fudging their numbers and saying like, oh no, I'm making 100%. Because they wanted to get all that money. And I think a lot of that was overlooked, to be honest with you, because I remember, even having to clean up another site coordinator's mess over the summer when I wasn't really working, and this guy fudged all his numbers, and they're like, oh, can you audit, the entire year and tell us where we need to re-report to the state? So that's what I'm saying. I think little things like that kind of led to what we're going to talk about, which was the implosion.
Yeah. I think that, so I think that there was definitely a little too much autonomy for our site coordinators. I think that there was also, because we were such a big team, we were such different supervisors, right? I think that there was definitely, so I think when I look at YPI and what went wrong, I don't feel that it fell on programming. I think that when it comes to programming and that, we had site coordinators that would do some stupid shit, right? But I mean, you're going to find that in any job. Right. Like you can go to All Stars and they'll tell you, oh yeah, we had this one site coordinator that did some stupid shit, right? I mean, let's be real, right? I think for me that the errors with YPI was all with the executive team. It was all with upper management. I think that programming worked their asses off. The reason why YPI had the reputation it did, it wasn't because of Dixon. It was because the work we did. He just piggybacked off of it. You know what I mean? He was, exactly. Exactly. Him and the whole executive team. But when it came to programming, we were the ones with our boots on the ground. And I think for me, what was really hard when YPI collapsed was the fact that all of that hard work was basically taken for granted by them. You know what I mean? Like, and we were the victims of it. Programming, our families, our kids that we work with, our programs, because I think we did amazing shit. They basically profited off of us, right? Everything that we did, all of the engagement from our families, all of that just made them richer and added to their political, kudos that they had in the city and in the state and everything. And I think that's what, out of the whole situation, I kind of felt like bent over. You know what I mean? Like, you capitalized on us, and I get it. Some people would be like, well, that's what a business does, right? You profit off of your workers, like. But, we weren't just some like stupid warehouse or office. Like, we were impacting people's lives. Right. You know what I mean? I still to this day, I will tell you that I feel that with what YPI did, we did change lives. We did impact Los Angeles' community. I think that I still suffer a lot of pain, right, from what happened with YPI, because I loved my company. I loved my colleagues. I loved my staff. I loved my cohort. And I loved what we did. I believed in it. I believed in the YPI mission. Right. I would even tell people like, oh yeah, if you're going to, pick a career, you pick a career where you can make a change in the world. You know what I mean? Like, I really drank that fucking Kool-Aid. Yeah. But the last 2 years, the Kool-Aid started tasting really sour. even then, no matter how sour that Kool-Aid was tasting, nothing prepared me for what happened.
Yeah.
I would say even the last week that YPI was open, nothing prepared me for that.
And I agree with you where you say, like, where we were, you know, as far as the programming side goes, that we were making a difference. We were doing great things. But I think just with the side note that, yes, the executives were fully at fault. And I think they were to blame. But I do also believe that a little bit of that trickled down, because when it comes down to money, you know, and executives are talking about money, then the level below that, they're going to be like, okay, we need to keep making this money. The level below that, they're going to be like, okay, we need to keep this train going, you know? So I do think that it started from the top, and that was a huge part of it. But I do think that little by little that started to trickle down, and you know, that's where a lot of the accountability was lost.
I think that our directors are, I mean, I have to be, you know, I have to be cautious about what I say. But in my opinion, our assistant directors were angels. And I can't speak for anybody above our ADs.
I see what you mean. And
our ADs were badass.
Nice.
EXL ADs were the shit.
And
blood, sweat, tears. Our ADs kicked ass. But like I said, I can't speak for anybody above our ADs or any other departments. But I just know that when it comes to our department, despite the fact that all of us regionals are different, all of us are different supervisors. I had an incredibly different supervision style than my colleagues and vice versa.
Right.
You know, we were all very different. And you've had multiple regionals, so you knew we were all different.
I had just about all of them, yeah.
So, you know, despite that, just us as a leadership team, those last couple of years, I think it was really dynamic. It was really beautiful. The whole support team, all of the, you know, the project specialists, even our office managers, like, it really was a golden age for us. You know what I mean? And I think that we did an amazing job, and they tried really hard. I don't for 1 minute feel as though our assistant directors did not advocate. And I know for a fact that the regionals fought and advocated all the time, to the point where we were getting pulled into offices and told, you know, hey, knock your shit off, you know, because we were being, in the last couple of years, as we started seeing, like what you were saying, like, hey, why am I not getting my supplies?
Right.
Like, why are you asking me to have my site coordinators do another list of supplies when you're just not even going to buy them? Right. You know what I mean? Like, we were fighting. And like I said, it was to the point where, you know, we were told, like, hey, you know, like, calmate. You know what I'm saying?
And I think that kind of leads to what I'm going to mention here, is that, you know, at some point, the writing wasn't just on the wall for us, but, you know, started to trickle down to our line staff, you know, and they started seeing, like, okay, something's fishy, you know, we're not starting work right away, our hours are cut down, you know, and finally, you know, it all culminated Friday, October 25th, right, 2019, at like 8:40 a.m., such a weird time. We were all unceremoniously terminated, like screwed, out of a job, you know, about 1,000 people, not just our department, but the whole company just completely imploded, right? And that was huge news, you know?
Well, I think that too, you have to keep in mind not to dismiss what was even happening before that day, but they had been laying people off already for like a couple of months. And so keep in mind that just 2 weeks prior to those doors closing, they cut half of our leadership in half. They laid a bunch of people off. And that was just our department. That's not counting what they did in the other departments. You know what I mean? So I think that's when shit started getting real for us, is when it was like, what do you mean you're being laid off? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
What do you mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just kind of, you know, it was pretty shocking, though. But what was kind of more shocking was some of the details that came out around why our money was so out of whack, you know? And, you know, there were some, you know, liars, right? Connivers and basically parasites that stole money from poor kids in order to live their presidential lifestyles, right? And talk about the fallout from that end, like what you remember hearing, because it was all over the LA Times And, you know, it was embarrassing because your administrators or, you know, teachers at work would be talking about it and you have no fucking idea. And it's like, what do you mean there's another article?
So I think that I was not surprised. And I say that because I knew that they were full of shit when we started having all these crazy, big, expensive buildings, right? How is it that other organizations don't have that? You know what I mean? And so I'll just tell you. So this is when I knew things were, this was a situation. It wasn't when I knew. I had been knowing, but this is when I knew that they were full of shit. So they decided when we moved into that big, pretty building, I guess Mr. Newsom, Gavin Newsom, was making his rounds. It was when he was going into his election and everything, right? And they sent us an email and they were like, you guys can't eat in the lounge. We're going to have this special event. Please make other arrangements. So I thought to myself, like, you're kicking out people who work in this building. Like okay, so they told us that, right? And so then at first, you know, people get excited, right? They're like, oh shit, are we going to get to meet, you know, the governor-elect? You know, like, are we going to get to shake, you know, Mr. Newsom's hand? Right. And we weren't even allowed near the location, like near the lounge, right? So sitting at my desk, the doors are open and, you know, all these important big wigs are, you know, coming in, walking in. And I felt like I was an animal in a zoo because all these people from like, you know, Sacramento, from, you know, all over California, all of the little LA, you know, people that were a part of his campaign and all of his people. And then, you know, of course, Dixon's people and all that stuff, right? You would think that, like, if you're going to come and you're going to do this news conference and you're going to be like, oh, I'm right here in this building where all these people are doing this great work and, you know, impacting the community. Wouldn't you go and, like, meet the people that were doing the work? Right. But they wouldn't even say hello to us. So just like he just looked in our office. So it was like, oh, so-and-so's over here. This is our expanded learning department. And it's like, they would just go and they'd be like, and then walk off. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm not going to vote for you. You didn't even, you were fucking 10 feet away from me. You're capitalizing on the work of me and my people. I'm not going to vote for you. Why don't you come up to me and look at my face and say, hey, you know what? Thank you for the work that your staff are doing. Not even thank you for the work I'm doing. Fuck the work I'm doing. Thank the work for my staff. Like, hey, how many schools do you have? Right? Like, tell me about your site coordinators. You know, what kind of activities? Like, yeah, like, speak on it. But I just felt like we were constantly being used. Right. Our work was constantly being used as a way to make other people look good. Right. So when that happened that day, oh man, I was so turned off. I mean, like I said, it wasn't the catalyst of it. I had already been feeling that way, right? But that was just an example of like how gross it felt. Right. Because it did feel gross, you know? It's like, this man is on TV telling everybody about my organization. It's like, fool, you don't even give a shit about our organization. Right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're just using us as a way to get voted in. Like, oh. Like, that's literally how it felt. And it felt gross like that all the time. Towards the end, because it was like you would hear people say all these great things about YPI and you're thinking, yeah, man, but I can't even get basketballs for my site. Right. You know what I mean? But this guy's sitting in a multi-million-dollar building on Sunset. Like, why did you guys need that office? Then towards this is when we knew shit was getting bad. Because as people started going to HQ towards the end, Fabian, there was nobody working in HQ. There was probably just a skeleton crew of people working in HQ. And we were like, but that shit was like thousands of dollars for them to rent, right? And I remember in the end when they were telling us like, oh, we don't have money for this. I remember regionals. I was one of them. They were like, why don't they just move the people from HQ to the Beverly building? Right. So that way they don't have to spend that money in Sunset. We like just move to Beverly. We have more than enough room in Beverly. Why aren't they just moving over here? Why are we not downsizing? Right. But instead of downsizing, it felt like they just laid people off. And it was just, I'm very angry. I'm so like, it's upsetting. Yeah. You're right. I still suffer from PTSD from it.
I think so. I mean, I've kind of felt that a bit as well. But, you know, you make a good point. You know, it's like rent's expensive. These buildings are not cheap. And what's even more silly is that there was like a whole warehouse-sized, you know, space that was not used for the entire time that we were on in that Beverly building. You know, so it was just poor poor management overall. You know, I remember walking through there. I'm like, what the hell is this used for? How come it's never, ever, like, you know, they don't keep anything there. It's just a big empty space, you know? But
and it was always like when you would ask those questions, Fabian, it'd be like, oh, well, why doesn't the warehouse just move over here? Why don't they release the warehouse in Sylmar? They could just move over here. And you would always get the stupidest responses. Oh, it's because so-and-so doesn't want to drive from the valley. Like, and I would hope that wasn't the reason. Mm-hmm. But it's like, if that was the reason, it's chicken shit.
Right.
It's chicken shit because of stupid decisions based on ego and greed. And now, you know, there's people that still haven't bounced back from this situation.
Right.
I was lucky. Mm-hmm. I was lucky. You know what I mean? Some people were luckier than others, but a lot of people, I think, are damaged. Right. Relationships are damaged, right? With partners. Like, it was incredibly humiliating. It was humiliating on October, on that last day, to call up all of my superintendents and my principals crying. Mm-hmm. I had to call my partners and I was in tears and I said, I don't know what to tell you. We're not going to be on site today. Mm-hmm. And that was humiliating. But lucky enough, like, some of my partners were amazing. One of my partners from one of my former partnerships, he offered me a job right then and there on the phone. He goes, Marissa, he goes, come down to the office. He goes, I have a position for you. I don't want you to be out of work. And then one of my other partners who I'm with now, he was like, you know what? I'm taking you and I'm taking my team and I'm taking my grants. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, but not everybody was that fortunate. Yeah. And then not all of the regionals had, partnerships that were in like, families. Right. So like, because one school couldn't, it would be very difficult for one school, even double funded, to be able to pay a regional supervisor, site coordinator, and team, right? The funding just isn't made that way. Mm-hmm. So if you were a regional that was lucky enough to have a really good partnership, because not everybody did, right? Not everybody had the best of relationships. That's just reality. I've even had my fair share of shitty relationships. It just so happened that, you know, I had a really solid cohort the last few years. If you were lucky enough, right, to have you know, schools that were a family of schools that could sustain your salary, right? And if the schools or the family of schools were like, hey, we want you and we want your team, then that was a plus, right? But if you were a regional supervisor that maybe had a lot of individual charter schools, it was really, that was going to be a challenge. Like, how was somebody going to say, I want to take you, I want to take your team? I think there were a lot of my colleagues who had to have tough conversations with some of their partners when their partners were like, oh, I want to bring you. And it was like, well, I don't know if you can afford me. Exactly. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I mean, that would have been like an amazing, huge, you know, pay cut. Right. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in all of the regionals, everybody, you know, we're all family people. And, you know, a lot of my colleagues, I mean, luckily I only rent, you know what I mean? But, you know, a lot of my colleagues are homeowners, you know what I mean? Yeah. With, you know, small children. So it was definitely a scary time for everybody.
Definitely. Yeah. And I'm glad you immediately, you know, bounced back and got your position secured. You know, I think at my level, site coordinator level, you know, it was kind of crazy because at, you know, 8:40 a.m. you're told you're asked out of a job. But by 1 p.m., you're driving.
We had a new job.
Yeah, you're driving over to fill out the paperwork for your new, you know, for your new position with the same position, but with a new company who I'd previously worked for. And it was kind of like, hey, they saved the day and everything, but it was unstable still after that, you know, because I wasn't.
Get me started.
Because I wasn't, you know, I wasn't with the company more than like 3 weeks because, you know, the schools still had the choice to say, like, okay, we don't want to go with you. We want to go with somebody else. So it was such a big mess. And I remember telling people, like, yeah, I had the same job with 3 companies in less than a month.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess before I jump into this, I'll kind of let you know when we kind of knew something was happening, right? Mm-hmm. So about 2 weeks before, so when the layoffs happened, first round of layoffs, that's where I think it really kicked EXL in the gut. I'll be honest with you, I didn't think that we were going to experience anything like that. We were the breadwinners of YPI, and I thought, like, they're just going to cut the fat of all these other departments, and they'll just run off of YPI, right? Like off of EXL, like let's just downsize and become an after school only org, you know, with the exception of maybe some of the other smaller departments that were not insolvent, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so, but then we got laid off.
Yeah.
Right? Like my best friend got laid off. Like, how you gonna fucking lay off the baddest fucking person ever, right? She's amazing. You know, she got laid off, and, you know, amongst others that got laid off, right? And that really broke my heart. It really broke my heart. It broke all of our hearts, actually. Like, it was a really emotional day. When our leadership staff got laid off, you know, we walked everybody to their cars. Everybody was crying. Everybody was crying. It was really a sad day when we experienced the first round of layoffs. We did not know who was going to get laid off. We knew that something was coming, and we knew that it was going to happen in the next 24 hours. Oh. And I think it's because, and it wasn't because our directors were telling us, it was because we were hearing it from the other departments already. Right. So, EXL, our director, I don't even want to talk about her. Our assistant directors, they were in the dark a lot towards the end as well. And so they were trying to maintain like a non-panic type environment, right? Because all of the other departments were in panic mode. And we would hear things from other departments and we'd be like, what? We haven't heard that. We were kind of like, we kind of looked like stupid, to be honest with you, because everybody else knew what was going on. And we were like, what? Aren't you going to tell us that yet? So we knew something was happening. And I think that was so frustrating for us because it was like, well, we're hearing this from this other department. We're hearing this from this other department. And what's up with that? And we would just be told like, look, guys, like, we don't know what's going on yet. You know what I mean? And it was because, I don't know if it's that they weren't getting information either. So they were being kept in the dark as well, because again, every director is different. So what one director would tell their group of people, another director wouldn't. And so I think that that's what we were kind of experiencing. But when the initial closure happened that morning, when we sent text messages to all of you guys telling you, come get your check and go cash it right away, it was kind of the same situation. I had been diagnosed with skin cancer the last month of YPI. And the day before we shut our doors, I was actually getting my skin cancer removed. Okay. And I was with my friend. She was the one who drove me out there to get the surgery done. And she was on the phone with friends from other departments. And as the doctor was suturing my incision, she got the text, Marissa, she goes, YPI is no longer, they're going to close the doors on us tomorrow. And I was like, bullshit. She's like, no, that's what so-and-so is telling me from, you know, the other department, right? And I was like, no, that's crazy. She was like, no, friend, no, for real. And again, like, this had been after she had already been laid off. We knew shit was happening, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Like, we are not going to close our fucking doors tomorrow. And she's like, friend, it's right here. It's right here. And sure enough, the next morning, you know, our ADs are like, call your SCs. And the word spread like wildfire really quick the night before. But it, like, to me, I'm like, YPI was a rumor mill, so shit would spread all the time, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it was correct. So on that morning, all of us showed up really down. I think we were afraid of what was going to be happening, but I think we were hoping that it wasn't going to happen. Right. You know what I mean? But again, it was just because it was the night before, other departments were already closing. So it was like we were next, right? It was really sad. So that morning, there was a lot of tears. You saw me, Fabian. I was bawling my eyes out. And I had just gotten my incision done. And it was, even that was kind of scary because the doctor told me the day before, like, don't get your wound wet. So I'm right here crying because, you know, we've lost our job and I have this big old bandage on my face and it was just really, really bad. And, so I remember, my AD was like, you know, why are you still here? Go ahead and go home. Like, and I was like, okay. And because I couldn't stop crying. You know, I'm already a very emotionally charged person. So, and so I left and I went to check in with my staff because my teams all reported to work, even though they weren't being paid. And so I went to go check on them. And I remember I went to go to a restaurant. It was around 1 o'clock, 1:30. I went to go eat at the restaurant down the street from my now current office. And I was calling my friend. She was going to come meet me for lunch. And just for shits and giggles, I just checked my phone and I saw the text messages like, are you going to the onboarding? I was like, what the fuck? So I called one of our ADs. I was like, what is this? And she was like, Marissa, they're going to bring us on board. Are you going to go? I think you should. And I was like, is this for real? And she was like, yeah. And so I called my friend. She was already on her way to meet me. And I was like, dude, I'll meet with you later. I need to go to this thing. They're having us go out to this hotel. And I remember when I showed up, you know, everybody was there and everybody was so beaten down. I don't know if you saw that too, Fabian, but everybody was exhausted. Everybody was beaten down. Like I felt like everything happened so quick. It was such a whirlwind. And I think I felt like they were saving the day. And I felt so good that Friday when they picked us up and seeing all my staff coming in and the relief, right? Like, oh my God, you mean I do have a job? You know, like it felt really, really good. And then, you know, when they stood up and they told us like, hey, you know, we're here. You guys are part of our family now. You know, we're going to, you know, continuity. We're going to keep programs going, you know.
And we're going to pay you for the week that YPI didn't pay you.
We're going to pay you for that week, right? Like everything was like, oh my God, these people are amazing. You know, I felt like, because I remember I told you EXO was the breadwinners, you know, like, oh man, yeah, somebody's picking us up. And then the next day, you know, we did our second round of onboarding. And that's when I started seeing certain people showing up. And it was like, what the fuck are you doing here? What are you doing here?
Right.
You know, and I'm not going to mention names.
No, I get you.
But it was like, what are you doing here? You are like the last person I should have seen here. You know what I mean? Not all of them. There's some people that showed up that I was like, oh man, you know, like you knew that we're good people. So you felt good knowing that they were going to be able to have a job too, you know? But there were a few in there that I was like, walk out the door. Right. Like, walk out the door. Like, how dare you show your face here? So that Saturday, Fabian, okay. So I start seeing these people, right? So then the rumor spread like, oh crap, like they're bringing people back. So we were like, are they going to bring back the people that were laid off 2 weeks prior? Right. So I'm thinking about the regionals that were let go, the project specialists that were let go. And so I called my friend and I was like, come down, they're giving jobs, you know? So she came down and they turned her away. Yeesh. They interviewed her and they turned her away. And they were like, oh, we'll give you a call. And I thought to myself, how are you going to turn that person away? But you're going to pick that person up. Right. And that's when I knew, Fabian, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't drink the Kool-Aid anymore. I was going to on that Friday. I was like, all right, man, I'm going to marry myself to this org. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because I felt like I'm not going to go down this road again. You know what I mean? It's not fair. Right. I was sick of feeling like shit wasn't fair. And so I made a decision in my mind that I was like, okay, I'm going to just take this one day at a time, but I know that this is not for me right now. And luckily, like I had a beautiful relationship with my superintendent and at one of my partnerships. And he approached me and he was like, look, before I get into that. So we think everything's great, right? For Friday. They come in, they hire everybody. Then comes Monday and everybody shows up to Beverly. And that's when the statement is made. In order for us to sustain the number of people that we've brought on board, we need to have these many schools commit to us. And it was like, wait, what do you mean? I thought they had already committed to you. I thought that this was a done deal. Right. And that's exactly like what you said. That's when talk to your principals, talk to your executives. Like, get them to sign with us, get them to commit to us, And I couldn't get down with that, Fabian. Yeah. I couldn't do it.
At that point, a lot of schools and admin were already disenfranchised. They were already done with it.
Yes, I couldn't do it. And so I didn't. I didn't do it. And I think that there's a couple of my former colleagues who probably still hold a bug against me for that because I wasn't going to do that. Right. I wasn't going to go and knock on your door and tell you to jump on board with something that I had no idea about. And I was just as much a victim of the situation as everybody else was. All of us were victims. And how am I going to go and look at somebody who I've known for 3 or 4 years as a trusted partner, who I've already basically had to tell, guess what? We don't have an after school program no more. And now I'm going to be like, no, join them. Yeah. Like, it just went against everything that I felt, right? So out of my cohort, I had one partnership that decided to leave, right? And that was the schools that you were at. Right. So they went with another org, right? One of my other partnerships signed a short term with them. And then my current partnership, we are actually also with them as more of like a pass-through situation. Yeah. And in that sense, in my experience now, having worked with them as partners, they're great partners. Yeah. I really enjoy them as an organization in regards to how organized they are with their partnerships. But I mean, as an employee, I don't know. I didn't work with them for very long. But as a partnership, I think they're doing really great. But I know that some other schools have had different experiences. And I think that's going to be the case with any one of these organizations. Right. There's going to be some partnerships that are going to love them, and there's going to be some partnerships that are going to hate them. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, but I'm kind of, I think I'm over the whole thing right now at this point, especially since, it seems like every year at the end of the school year and in the summer, you're always like, am I going to have a job next year? And I'm kind of in limbo in that position right now. Unfortunately, I was a victim of still of that fallout, to no fault of my own, but it is what it is. So we'll see if I stay in the after school world or not, or if I move on to something else. But to close out, this whole YPI discussion, it was something that was definitely unprecedented, a nonprofit with such gross mismanagement of money, of trust, and it affected so many people, and it's disgusting, embarrassing to be a part of it. But I mean, overall, it makes me angry to know that the money that was supposed to go to, kids in needy areas, right, went to go pay for office furniture, went to go pay for a rich guy's kids' private tutoring, went to fucking politicians and their goddamn campaigns. The people who are saying, hey, let's get you out of poverty are keeping your ass in poverty. And that's the part that pissed me off the most. And, I don't know who had their hands in the cookie jar there, but, our CEO was very well connected to a lot of people in the Democratic Party. And I hope that, at some point maybe, and maybe it won't, but I hope that it comes to light and those people get what they deserve. Because that's
I think that there's more people. So, okay, so before we move on, I will tell you that I really, I appreciate YPI. Like just what I learned there. Yes. I experienced more professional growth in my time with YPI than any other position I've ever worked. So I think for that and for the relationships and the experience, I am so incredibly indebted to YPI as an organization. But I also feel that there are individuals that I feel have not been held accountable I think when the articles came out, all of it was focused around him. Right. But, there were other people, specific individuals whose signatures were on a lot more documents.
Exactly. Yeah.
There were other people that were running that organization while he was off, schmoozing with politicians and, jumping onto all these different, movements and bills and all this stuff. So he was really like a face, right? So he was the schmoozer. Mm-hmm. But there were other individuals that were way more involved in the situation. And so I feel like, I don't know if there's any accountability on them, but I think I would feel so much better about the situation if I knew that a certain individual was being held accountable.
Yeah,
right, for their part in the situation.
I immediately remember thinking, I hope some people go to jail over this.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with you.
The last thing I'll say about that, though, and this is a little controversial here, but when the white man comes knocking and starts talking about, I want to help all you, you poor colored children, don't trust that shit.
Yeah, I think, do you remember that one conference where he had just gotten off of a plane?
Oh, I just came back from France.
Yeah. I just came back from, no, it was Italy or something.
He came in his tiny little red shoes, no socks. I'm like, this son of a bitch came for the photo op, right?
He didn't even know what to tell us. He was like, oh, what do I tell you guys? Well, I mean...
And on top of that, I think that was the same day he announced, we have a brand new grant, and it's for artists in Hollywood.
People stuck around because of who we worked with. It wasn't who we worked for. Mm. You know what I mean? Regional stuck around because, we loved our friendships. We loved our cohorts. You know what I mean? It was hard on us. It was really hard. They had us doing a lot of work. And when your work was not manifesting into what it was supposed to, then it just felt like, well, you're just having me do this fucking work for nothing.
Right.
You're not even taking my shit seriously because, I outlined all of this and nothing's manifesting from it. Nothing's coming from it. But anyways, okay.
Let's get rid of that asshole of an agency. All right, let's move on. Switching gears. And just briefly touch on this because I want to jump into some social media says comments for sure. But where are schools headed next year? I know it's ever changing right now. It's very topical. Trump's trying to, make threats here and there. And, schools are not ready to open, right? What does after school look like? What does schools look like for next year?
Well, I think, so what I really appreciate about my new position is that I'm a school employee now, right? Nice. I'm not an external partner. Mm-hmm. So, I'm experiencing an incredible amount of, professional growth because, formerly we didn't really get to be engaged in the ins and outs of a school itself. And that itself is its own beast, right? So I know that for us, it's definitely been challenging, for after school and for day school. And that is because, we've had to wait for regulations and then regulations change. And then there's multiple layers. So there's Department of Education. There's, the LA County Department of Education. There's CDC, there's CDE. So it's there's the federal, there's the state. So everybody wants to put their 2 cents in as to what needs to happen for schools, right, in the coming school year. But I think that for people that work in the schools, this is really scary. And it's because, just already during the summer, there's been quite a few times where, we've had to shut down a site. And we're just doing meal distribution, by the way. But, we've had to shut down because there's been a possible exposure. Not an actual exposure, but a possible exposure. So how is it that I have to shut down? No. I have to shut down for a possible exposure, right? And you have to quarantine all those staff. And when you're already short-staffed, which we all know is the case for after-school programming, how do you continue if you have to quarantine those staff? And you know what I mean? This is like a nightmare staffing-wise, right? And then there's the social distancing aspect of it. I've been telling my site coordinators, I was like, look, we're going to go back to old school after-school programs. We're not going to get to have classrooms anymore because once those kids leave the classroom during the day school, custodial has to go in there and disinfect those areas. Mm-hmm. So, we're talking about creating like camp pods, like outside in our play yard where we have like canopy classrooms for after school, because schools are now in a situation where they don't have enough space for their day school students. Right? So after school, not necessarily being an afterthought, it's like, I feel like with after school, we cannot make any concrete plans until the school has made their concrete plans. Yeah. So it's a lot of waiting. Parents are, asking questions. I will tell you, we're coming back and we're planning, because, shit changes every day. Yeah. We are planning on coming back in a hybrid form. So it'll be some distance learning, some on-site learning. My principals are being very strategic about, what students they, schedule in for different cohorts. So this is like a new frontier for education, for teachers, for expanded learning. I think what's really exciting for us in expanded learning is that, exciting and scary, because there's just situation scary, period, just the unknown. But I think what's really exciting for us is that the expanded learning department for the California Department of Education has been really, they've been at the table. So, Michael Funk's at the table. He's talking, he's engaging in making sure that expanded learning is a part of the school reopening, right? And how are we playing a critical part in students coming back onto campus? And then, CDE is even going as far as, creating a trailer bill that's going to, that they're going through that process right now and approvals and all of that is going to change guidelines for after school as a result of COVID, right? To allow us some more flexibility, because expanded learning is more important now than ever before. There is a learning gap that is obvious, that is there. We know it's the case. Distance learning was a nightmare, not for all schools, but for some schools. I know for us, it was very touch and go. So now is an exciting time for us, because it's our opportunity to shine and be like, okay, this is what we can do, and be like creative and inventive and thinking outside of the box. But on a compliance end, this is scary, because it's like you want to be able to stay within compliance with grants, and not jeopardize, your funding in the future or whatever the case may be. But you're wanting to be able to do that while still having this like wild, wild west approach to education, because that's really the way it feels right now. It feels like we are in the wild, wild west. We are starting from the beginning, and it's really interesting to see how some teachers have risen to the occasion, youth leaders as well, and some who have not, right? I was doing interviews all day yesterday. I had 8 interviews, and they were all via Zoom. I was exhausted by the end of the day. But now when I interview somebody, I'm not only looking at how are you interacting with me, but how are you managing yourself on this Zoom, right? Because I might need you to Zoom later. I might need you to do an activity. So now even the way that we interview and the way that we screen applicants, technology is now at the forefront. Right? Like, are you comfortable in front of a camera? Can you engage me on a screen? Right? Because what we noticed is that some of our youth leaders, when we had to make this change, some of them are just like, this is not for me. Like, I can't do this Zoom thing.
Hey, can I interject there? That part kind of is a mind fuck, because y'all people are on fucking TikTok and Instagram and all that shit. But you can't make a 2-minute video explaining how to make fucking, nachos or some shit? Like, come on.
I agree. But yeah, so, I mean, it's definitely different. Our advisory meetings have been, fantastic. They're really, LACO is really doing an amazing job of supporting the schools in our area. And they are, so available, even with the whole YPI thing. They were so supportive. They at the advisory meetings, the whole YPI thing was really, it was huge for CDE. That was the biggest freaking thing. I think that, what I heard people say is that it was unprecedented. It was historical. That it had never happened before. So because something like that had never happened before, CDE didn't know how to deal with it, and so they had to, it was like real time, like solution driven type shit, right? And I feel like that's where we're at with COVID. It's real time. We've never dealt with this before. And so now how do we deal with it? So it almost feels like we're in the twilight zone. I was telling my youth leaders and my site coordinators during a PD that I did with them via Zoom. I told them, look, guys, like, we're bonded for life. We've been through so much together.
Yeah.
Like, we lost our jobs and had new jobs and then got new jobs again. And now we're in a pandemic. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. That same thing here. You know, it's been just, I feel so bad for like the class of 2020, you know, and I don't know, this whole, like, especially for our kids that we worked with in YPI, you know, not only did they have to deal with losing their after school program in the first semester, then the second semester, they don't even have school, you know, they have to stay at home. So, I mean, kudos to those kids.
And I think for the kids too, to touch on that. So my daughters had to stay home as well. She was an 8th grader this year. So she did not get to have a graduation or anything like that either. I think for our kids, it started off very exciting and fun. Getting to stay home, like, what? I get to stay home. I think after about 3 weeks, that's when kids realized that it was real. I remember the day I had to tell my daughter when we got the email that said we were, you know, distance learning was going to finish out the semester. I told her, honey, you know what? You're not gonna be going back to school. You know, it's all distance learning. And she cried.
Yeah.
She cried for a good hour, and she was just like, Mom, like, I didn't even get a chance to say bye to my teachers. Like, I'm not going to see my friends. Like, and so I think that even for kids, it started off as like vacation, you know, and then it was like, wait, what?
It got real.
Wait, what? Yeah, exactly. It got real really quick. Yeah. I agree with you. I feel really bad for class of 2020 period, like high school, college, elementary. I think schools have really tried hard to do something special for them. I know that our seniors, for our kids, our graduation is in the week after next. So we actually delay our graduation. And we're doing a drive-up graduation for our kids.
Well, that's cool.
So, you know, we're in the process of like EXL's putting together little like little graduation gift bags with like candy and stuff like that in there for them. So, you know, it's definitely been a journey for our graduates.
Definitely. So, I mean, that brings me to my next topic. You know, speaking of graduations, I guess technically graduated from Mount St. Mary's College recently with my BA, but no frills, no celebration of any sort. And that's kind of the way I like it. So I lucked out, you know.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. You know, I didn't get to have the whole ceremony thing, but I was just going to skip it anyway. But,
yeah,
you know, that wasn't my thing. Okay, and we'll get to that because I have my thoughts. You know what? Let's jump on that now because this is a topic of social media says.
Okay.
I personally, right, I understand the importance of an education, right? I understand the importance of telling kids you have to go to college, right? But I kind of, I lost my interest in it very early. You know, I remember going to community college and thinking like, this is a joke. You know, I remember going to like, you know, the English 201 classes and I was the only one who knew how to write a goddamn paragraph, you know? Like everybody else was just incompetent. You know, and as soon as I got to you know, transferred over to a 4-year, same thing. You know, people don't know the basic, you know, the basic rules of writing. They don't know math. They don't know anything. But here they are taking useless classes on like philosophy and religions and stuff like that. So I always kind of saw it as a waste, you know? I mean, I hate to put it that way, but that's how I saw it. And I've always been kind of a rebel where it's like, oh, I don't need that. I can do it on my own, you know? And so my thing was, I don't know why, but I was always kind of like proud of like, you know, I don't need a damn degree. I'm going to do things on my own until you start to get that roadblock where people won't give you a shot, you know? And that's when I decided to finish, you know, school. But the topic of this week's social media says was, you know, higher education. How important is it? Some people, you know, think that a degree is the end all be all or whatever, and other people succeed without it or in spite of it. So we had a lot of feedback. We'll get to your story in a bit, But we have, I think, like 15, 16 comments, and I think that's the most we've ever had for this segment. So what I'm going to do, because there's so many of them, and I don't think we can discuss all of them at length, is I'll read about three or four of them at a time, and we'll kind of react to the cluster of them. So
sounds good. Let's do it.
All right. So let's go ahead and start with Armando Gonzalez on Facebook. So he says, seems obvious, but it just depends on what you want to do. On the one hand, a degree is basically universally required for almost all white-collar jobs, including entry-level positions. I personally know folks of older generations who have been barred from advancing their careers for lack of a degree. On the flip side, there are so many good paying blue-collar jobs and trades that only require a high school diploma. Although I will say that the long term, it would probably be better to have a degree to manage rather than labor. There's also the military. I work with a fair share of military dudes who are doing far better financially than some folks who have advanced degrees in something like liberal arts. I'm not bashing their degrees or their learning, but it's not always the road to financial security. I'll also say that financial security by some of these military folks has definitely had its costs and sacrifice above and beyond what most people would be comfortable with. So that's Armando Gonzalez. Let's move on to the next comment. Teresa Hernandez on Facebook says, I think there's always room for improvement. Not everyone has the resources or willpower out of high school for college. Most haven't even reached their maturity at that point. Some still haven't reached their maturity. But if you want something and it needs a degree, license, or certificate, then do it. It's never too late. Even if it takes longer because of financial reasons, emotional support, etc., take it one day at a time and make it happen. I don't know. I think I try to continue to learn new things to show my kids that age doesn't mean shit. You do what you want. You do what you want. You do what you have to do to survive and grow. And you have to be better than you were yesterday. Let's take a look at one more comment before we chime in on some of these. Alex Ten Chavez on Facebook says, going to college isn't the end-all be-all of a person's career. This pandemic is an example. Most people work with college degrees. They're working from home. And all the essential workers are still working. The trades are more important than a lot of jobs. We need plumbers, carpenters, electricians, truck drivers. As a delivery driver, when everything shut down, we blew up. We have been working 6 days since March. All the products we consume come from a truck. We as a society need to stop making trades a bad thing. A college degree doesn't mean you're smart, and not having a college degree and working a trade doesn't mean you're dumb. So some similar ideas brought up there. What do you think of that so far?
So I completely agree. I think that if you're going to be a doctor, you should definitely go to medical school. Right. You know what I mean? I definitely believe that. But I think sometimes I am a little bit thrown. Okay, so I interview people all the time, right? I don't have a degree. Right. And like you said, we'll get into that at a later, in a little bit. But I interview people all the time that have like bachelor's degrees. And, when you look to see what their bachelor's degrees are in, and then you look at their work history, you're like, you paid a lot of money to have a degree for a job that you don't even have. Right. So it leads me to believe why people choose the majors that they do. Right. Or why people choose the like liberal arts, for example. Right. If somebody gets a degree in liberal arts, you're like, oh, well, that can kind of put you, anywhere. Right. But it's just, I feel like if that's the case, if you don't really know what you're going to do, then why waste the money? Why not, go to school when you know that this is what I'm going to do, right? And spend those big dollars then. But so one of the comments here was about maturity. I completely agree with that. When I started college right out of high school, I didn't take it seriously. Right. I feel like when you first go into college, they give you just enough rope to hang yourself. And that's what I did. Like, I had all the freedom in the world. They didn't give a shit if I showed up to class or not. It's not like in high school where if you ditched a class, right? So as soon as I got into college and I realized I had all that freedom, I totally screwed college off, man. I took a bunch of stupid classes. I mean, not like stupid and like they gave me something, but it wasn't what college is supposed to be, right?
No, I get you,
and then it was right before, like right when going into my 20s. And I would say once I hit like 20 years old, I stopped going to college. I was just working at that point, partying, living my young 20-something-year-old life. And college just was not it was more of a social situation than anything.
Exactly.
Right? That's where I interacted with my friends and, dated and partied and did all that. So I stopped going to college like early on. Like I said, the only reason I ended up going back to it was when my mother had passed away, and I really wanted to establish a career for I just had my daughter. She was 6 months old, and I was like, okay, now's the time. I was 27 when I went back to school, and the second time that I went to college, that is when I fell in love with learning. I took all of my child development classes. I took history classes, like everything that I needed to, because I was going to transfer. Because remember, when I went back, it was with the intention to become a teacher. So, I took all the correct classes that I was supposed to take, and I loved it. I loved it. It felt so good to learn again. But I had the maturity to do it. I was already married. I already had a kid. I wasn't concerned about going and partying in Cancun for spring break. Like, you know what I mean? I wasn't there to meet my next, crush. Like, it was literally, I was there for the right reason. And I feel that those individuals, and this is just from my own experience, I feel that individuals who go back into college later on in their adulthood are more successful. I feel that they are, because the maturity level is there. They're going there for an intentional purpose. They're not just going because when you leave high school, you're supposed to go to college because that's what everybody tells you, right? I almost feel like it would be more beneficial for when people first come out of high school to just get a damn job, right? Even just a part-time job, just to learn how to just mature and interact with the world. And then when you're ready to actually apply yourself, that's when you should be going into college. Because otherwise, I feel like it's just a waste of time. Or you end up having these people who go into college, maybe their parents pay for them to get into college, the whole USC thing. So we have all these youngsters or entitled people that go into college right out of high school because their parents can pay for it, or because they have all this shit. And then they take these classes and they're not even retaining the information.
Right.
It's not even like they're leaving college feeling like, I'm ready to jump into the workforce. They're coming out just as immature and stupid as when they went in. But they have that stupid piece of paper that allows them to then go get a job and then fuck something up, right?
Exactly.
So I feel like maturity is a huge, huge thing when it comes to college, right? And so I definitely think that's something to take in mind. I know that for my daughter, I am not encouraging my daughter to go to a 4-year university because I'm actually encouraging my daughter to go into a trade. And that is because she has already shown exceptional skill in makeup design. She's a self-taught special effects makeup artist. And she works with all of the materials, like, the liquid latex, and, she watches all the YouTube tutorials. Like, she's amazing at what she does. And so I am not going to sit there and play well, you got to graduate and go to college and get into UCLA, and when her skills are not showing us that.
Right. Nurture the passion.
Exactly. So let's tap into the passion. So she can tell you right now, she can be like, oh, I'm going to go to the Los Angeles Film School. Like, she already tells people that's where she's going to go. She tells them, this is the type of, a career I'm going to go into. So her showing that at 14 years old to me, because I've been able to encourage that skill and that passion in her, I feel is giving her a step up from maybe another 14-year-old who hasn't even thought about what the hell they want to do in the future, right? So I think it's all about, as a parent, how you're going to support that child and their success. Sure. You know what I mean? In regards to college or not.
Definitely. All right, let's get back into some more. We got Sixto Villacorta on Facebook, and he says, it all depends on what your career aspirations are. There are careers that require extensive experience rather than higher education and vice versa. Personally, I believe higher education is important. I've been able to climb the corporate ladder not just by having the experience, but because I also have a degree. Next, we have Roy Rodriguez on Facebook. He says, depends on the person. If they can hustle and want to put in the hard work at a lower paying start and earn their way to a bigger payday on the back end, then higher education is not as necessary. However, if they want a higher upfront payday, not to have to hustle and pay dues like someone that didn't go to college, then get the degree. Not saying that one is better than the other, far from it. It depends on the person and their motivational drive. Let me read a couple more. Elmer Diaz on Facebook says, I don't know, man, get in debt with a career that's going to take years or pay a few $100 to a trade school at the same time. It all depends on what you're trying to study or be. And then I'm going to read two more before we chime in. George Hernandez on Facebook says, I'm not an education person. I think you could make it with or without. Of course, if I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, you would need it. And I know people with no schooling after high school that make way more money in 2 or 3 years of a hardworking job than someone who went to school for 4 to 8 years to be where they're at. And then a final comment before we chime in from Maury Rams on Facebook. He says, I'm a college dropout. Great subject. And I think he says that because he's very successful in his business. I've always known him to be a very successful guy, so I think that's why he put that in there. What do you think of some of those comments so far?
Well, I worked my way from a low paying all the way up. So I started as a youth leader part-time. And like I said, I've always promoted really quickly. Right. So when I was at Options, I started as a youth leader getting paid $12 an hour. And I promoted to lead a teacher within I think it was about 4 months, I told you. And when I was at Options, I was with the elementary part-time for about 2 years, and then I promoted to full-time site coordinator. So again, just working my way up. So I promoted to full-time middle school. And then when I left there, I went over to YPI, and that was a big promotion because it was like, well, not promotion, but I got a pay bump, right? So that's when I became full-time over at YPI as a high school site coordinator. And then I promoted to regional supervisor after 2 years. So when I was going through the interview process for the regional position, it requires a BA, you know what I mean? So I was having, I applied with the expectation that I wasn't going to get it, you know? And I just kept saying like, oh, well, it'll be worth the experience. It's worth the experience. I always tell people it's great to go through an interview, even if it's something you're not going to get, just to have the experience of interviewing, right? So that's how I approached it when I applied for the regional position. And so I remember, I went through my interview with leadership. So I got, interviewed by the ADs and by Fidel, and by regionals and everything. So I got through that, and that was gravy. I was able to sell myself, right? But then I had to interview with the HR director. And it was because, she needed to evaluate whether my work experience equated that of a bachelor's, because a bachelor's is what was required. And that was a really nerve-wracking interview. It was like about 35 minutes. And I was on the phone with her. And, she asked me really tough questions. And I needed to be able to word my answers, in a way that showed her that I was going to be able to understand and grasp the work, right, of being a regional. And I remember having a conversation with my regional after I had the interview with the AD, with the director of HR. I didn't think like, oh man, dude, I don't know if I got this shit. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I remember talking to my regional and I told him like, oh man, I just don't think I'm going to get it because I don't have my degree. And I'll never forget what he told me. He goes, go back to school and just get that damn degree. He goes, even if it's a degree in basket weaving, he's like, just get it so that you can have a BA. And I remember thinking to myself, like, that's some bullshit, right? Not him, like I love him, but I just thought to myself, that's some bullshit right there. Yeah. That you could basically be like, well, I do have a BA in basket weaving, and that would be what. Yeah, and that would be what gets me through to the job. Not my experience, not my 10 plus years of experience in the field. No, it would be because I have a fucking degree in basket weaving. So, I'm definitely the person that works their way up. I didn't finish my degree because my husband became disabled. And so he was working and I was working and I was going to school. But when my husband became disabled, I needed to become the breadwinner for our family. And so working full time and then some, because we all know as a site coordinator is regional, you don't work in your 8 hours, you work beyond that. So I was exhausted and I stopped going to school. And I was able to, move up despite that because when he became disabled, I was still just a site coordinator for middle school and options.
Okay.
So I stopped going to school. I moved over to YPI, and the experience that I had, was able to get me to move up that ladder to where now I'm basically a program director.
Right.
Right. And, with my organization. So it's definitely, it's been a long road. I think for me, where it causes anxiety is not in the fact whether I have the capacity. I know I have the capacity to do anything.
Right.
I know I'm a hard worker. I know I'm good at being a supervisor. I know I'm good with after school. I think for me, where the anxiety comes in with the degree is that I have to start from the bottom no matter where I go. I can't just go in and have them look at my work history and say, we're going to hire you. Right. Now, granted, some places are totally down to do that. Right. Some organizations are like, oh, we're going to hire you no matter what. We love you.
Right.
We value your work ethic. But like, if I was going to, let's say I tried to go get a job at like LAUSD, those like 6-figure salaries, I know I could do those jobs, but because I don't have a degree, I won't even get considered for it.
Exactly.
So I feel like that's where I hit the ceiling with the degree. It's not whether I can do the job. I didn't need to go to college to get trained how to do after school. You get that through experience.
Yep.
But I will never be able to go and be an executive director of a nonprofit organization without having a degree, right? Unless I started it myself.
All right. Let me run out of breath here and read through the rest of these comments so we can get to the fun part. All right. So Elizabeth Garcia on Facebook says, I ended up going to UEI for medical assistant. I passed with awesome grades, rare for me, and did it on my time and my hours. I applied to so many jobs right after and was denied due to no experience. Ended up $10,000 in debt. Oof. Diane Hurtado, Diane, formerly of YPI.
Yeah.
On Facebook says, I think everyone should have something more than a high school diploma to make yourself more desirable in the workforce. You can open more doors depending on the field of interest. Unfortunately, we live in a society that puts way too much value on a piece of paper. I can honestly say what I learned in college is not what I'm practicing, but it did open doors. I know there's people that have said, well, I make this much and only have a high school diploma. But the scary part of that statement is that if there's a layoff or economic downfalls, you might not be able to get a job after. At least with something more than a high school diploma, you can have the option of moving somewhere else. I know many people that many people that can't just move somewhere else because they don't have the desirable qualifications when it comes to degrees or certificates. We have Yesenia Montes on Facebook. She says, I have many years of managing restaurants, and since I wanted to get out of the food industry, I applied for other industries that don't deal with food. They required a degree of some sort, which is sad in a way because you could have 10 plus years in managing and still not get a job. But come on, it's the same thing, not handling food. Then again, with a degree, even with the master's, they still require some sort of experience first. So how the fuck is that going to happen if they don't give anyone a damn chance? It could go either way at this point. Perla Villanueva on Instagram says, I think social media fools people, young and old, into thinking that education isn't needed and there's something wrong with our lives for working hard. I've never really felt smart in school. My siblings and everyone around me were much smarter, so it made me work harder. Nothing came easy, and I didn't have much guidance, but my pops gave me this hunger for knowledge that schools couldn't really fulfill because of their structures and large number of students per classroom/teacher. I tried going to college right after high school, but it wasn't in the cards for me, so I joined the military. It offered a career and housing and possible benefits if I survived. I joined in early 2004, odds not directly in my favor. I served, full of stories there, got out, moved to Arizona and enrolled in school and took a welding class along with other regular classes. I fell in love. Prior to this class, I'd never really seen a weld. Anyway, I feel that higher education can offer new experiences that you otherwise wouldn't be exposed to. I wasn't able to get my degree yet, but I haven't given up on a degree, and I'm also not forcing it. I'm just going to continue to kick ass and work 3 times as hard as my male counterparts. Raquel Centeno on Instagram says, I think I'm in this age where social media has such a big role plays in people's lives, higher education is not so necessary anymore. Many have been able to be successful without a degree. It takes different type of skill that not all of us have. I think getting an education is great, but not necessary unless, of course, you want to enter a field that requires a degree. Then it becomes a requirement. Mariana Russell on Instagram says, I think because of social media and superpower platforms, buying followers on Instagram, Facebook, the value of an education has gone extremely low. More people are starting businesses and becoming paid over popularity. Great thing for the economy, but damaging to society to some extent, in my opinion. I think Elon Musk himself said he would hire someone without a degree if they have the experience. Kat Huerta on Instagram says, I think degrees are overrated. I have an AA and no one has ever asked to see it. Even if you do even if you do,
it's true.
Yep. Even if you do graduate with a degree, you still need experience to get a good paying job. In my opinion, gain the knowledge and experience, but don't stress over a degree. Real world experience is what you need, with the exception of medical professionals. I don't think anyone checks degrees anymore.
Yeah.
And finally, we have a former, and this is topical to the conversation we had. We have a former YPI student, current college man, Terry Taylor III, on Instagram says, the decision on whether one should get higher education depends on one's financial status. We try to achieve higher education in order to better ourselves in the future financially. Rich people don't really go to college to achieve financial stability since they already have it. So to them, it's more like bragging rights type of thing. For poor people going to college, it's a thing that's praised rather than for bragging rights. For people who are in poverty, if they go to college, they're 90% more likely to get out of poverty. Also, we live in a society where if you don't get a college degree, your life will worsen considering how much more things become expensive and most people are paid minimum wage. Even if you work full-time, you would barely be able to pay any bills without government assistance. And believe me, you don't want to be stuck on that. Also, statistics show that in the future, more jobs will require college degrees, and those jobs pay more than most of the other jobs. It's a mouthful of responses, right? I mean, I'm glad we got so many responses because a lot of them said a lot of the same things, but I mean, these are great perspectives to have, you know? I'm glad there's those type of perspectives. Just kind of to summarize things, you know, I agree with some of these comments where they say, let's push the trades a little more. You know, me personally, I feel that somebody should have pushed me into a trade. You know, I don't know. I feel like that I missed that whole window where nobody really exposed me to it. It was always about go to college. But then again, I didn't even take the SATs. Nobody pushed me to go to college in high school as far as like, I didn't even know when to take the SATs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, just a big old mess on my end. And we talked about your college story a bit, but is there anything else you want to add about your college story?
Just that I don't know, like, I think I agree with you 100% in us pushing people into the trades. Not pushing people, but like
at least exposing.
Also highlighting it as an option. Yeah, because I definitely feel that had I had I think I would have approached college differently. Definitely coming out of high school, knowing what I know now. To be honest with you, I don't even know if I would have gone right into college. Right. Having come out of high school, like I think that it really, I mean, for the memories and the friends, yeah, of course, like, you know, because I made so many, you know, I had so many experiences right in college, but none of them were educational in the beginning, let me tell you. Yeah. So yeah, I just, I think in the beginning, and it should be that way, right? Maybe the way that they structure, you know, colleges in the beginning is maybe the first 2 years should just be like, I don't want to say like shit classes, but you know, maybe they need to structure those first 2 years of college to meet the social emotional needs of a high schooler coming into adulthood, right? And then maybe saving these high end, you know, expensive coursework and all that shit for like, you know, a little bit later. You know, maybe they can create like a timeline of this is what you should do. I know that other countries have a very different approach to college. And like, I worked at a Jewish community center as a camp director for one summer in my early 20s. And I got an opportunity to meet what they call a shlicham, and that's how you say it. I don't know, it's been 100 years since I worked there. But basically, they would have like kind of like a pseudo foreign exchange type person that would come from Israel. And so there was a young woman who came from Israel for the summer, and she would work like as a counselor with us, and she would do all of the different traditional things that are required at a Jewish community center. So she would do like the Shabbat and all of that stuff. Okay. So anyways, so her and I, became really close, and she would tell me all the time about how stuff was in Tel Aviv, where she lives. And she told me how when they come out of high school, of course, keep in mind, guys, this was like 20 years ago. She told me that when they come out of high school, they don't go straight into college. They go to the military. And that it's very respected to be a part of the military. Right. And that I remember her telling me that you can't get a job or even go to college or even rent an apartment without being able to show your military status. That is actually frowned upon if you hadn't served in the military, right? She was actually a sniper trainer in the military. And she was beautiful, by the way. I wish I could remember her last name because I never spoke to her again after that summer when she went back to Israel. I even tried to look for her on Facebook, but I don't even remember. Like I said, I don't even remember her last name. I only remember her first name. So if I ever find that girl, Yifat, I'm going to like hug her like crazy. She told me so much. So she was telling me that, she went into the military, and that when you come out of the military, that's when you go into college. So they even place education differently, right? Like we want you to grow up, mature, you know what I mean? Learn what it is to be a responsible adult, which is what they're taught in the military. Right. So that way when they go into college, that natural next step, they can approach it differently, right? It's not, I feel like in the United States, kids are taught that you go into college, you join sororities and fraternities, you go to fucking frat parties, you get fucked up and drunk, you go out to fucking, a spring break. Like, and we know that that's not the reality. You know what I mean? But when you think about, if you put yourself in a 15-year-old's head, isn't that what television is showing you? Yeah. I know that when I was growing up, I grew up watching MTV Spring Break, right? Yep. So like, it's just, I feel like even the way that we approach and condition our kids and how they approach college needs to be changed. Because I just really feel like, yes, there are some very serious kids out there that leave, high school, go into college. They're, natural born scholars. They get their shit done. They get their degree. They go on to be fucking, finance geniuses or doctors or lawyers or whatever the fucks, right? And then you have the rest of us or like, we're going to college because we're told we're supposed to go to college. Yeah. And then we end up with these like ridiculous degrees that we don't even use. Right. And we end up working at a bank when we have a degree in like biology. What the fuck do you have a degree in biology for if you're working at Bank of America? You know what I mean? So yeah, that's good. Those are my last 2 cents.
I always trip out. It's funny you mentioned the types of degrees. I trip out when people have like a gender studies like degree. I'm like, wait a minute. The kid in that Arnold movie, Kindergarten Cop, taught us all you need to know about gender studies. Boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. I'm like, if it can't be, perfectly stated there, then I don't know what to think. But
I think that they'll make a degree. I know we'll probably get some heat from this, man. But I think you could get
let it go.
I feel like you could get a fucking degree in anything these days. Case in point, go get a fucking degree in basket weaving, right? I mean, you could create a fucking profession out of anything, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, and last thing I'll say on this too. Look, I'm not against education. Obviously, I work with kids in schools, but when it comes down to it, it's not everything, because like you have mentioned, I've interviewed people with degrees, not just, bachelor's degrees, but people with master's degrees. And a lot of them I wouldn't hire to wash a dish, and some of them that I have hired have turned out to be such big disappointments with crappy work ethic, right? And then they have like this air about them where it's like, well, I have a master's one. Well, go get a fucking job, that
exactly
your master's pertains to, but education is also, in my opinion, sometimes a money grab. And I think that's why they allow these kids to fail, because they're getting their money either way, right? And I mean,
exactly.
Or for somebody like me who, took such a long hiatus and I had to come back and go to Mount St. Mary's College, which is a private college, I owe so many tens of thousands of dollars, just for trying to better myself. And a lot of things need to change, If you're somebody who believes in education and you want to push that on kids, great, do that, right? But give them other options as well. Talk to them about trades, military. Don't make that such a negative stigma, Mm-hmm. But that's all I have to say.
I think even when it comes to like school, right? Like with education, like in terms of like, being the ones who are doing it. Like, I think if you were going to be like a superintendent, for example, you need to have gone to school. You need to have a fucking higher education. You need to have a higher degree. Like, you are the head honcho. Right. So, yes, I feel like for certain positions, 100%. But there's been so many, and there's been teachers, right, that come out of like their credentialing programs, and they might already have a very natural, like, for example, let's say myself. Okay, let's say I went and I finished a credentialing program. Mm-hmm. I'm already very high energy. I'm already very engaging. So me coming out and jumping into being a classroom teacher, I would probably rock at it.
Right.
Whereas maybe somebody else who went and did the same credentialing program with me, but doesn't have that natural rapport with students, they get to go become teachers and be shitty teachers.
And that happens.
Because they don't have the way to engage the students. Mm-hmm. So even then, that stupid little piece of paper, I feel bad saying that, but like that stupid little piece of paper.
That's what it is. Yeah.
It is what it is, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a great teacher because you went through the credentialing program.
Exactly.
Right? Whereas somebody else who maybe is not very well seasoned at all could be amazing. But
exactly.
They don't have paper. So, yeah, definitely money grab. 100% agree with you there.
Let's end this with something fun.
Okay.
We've had a lot of blow-ups right now, and that's good. I'm like letting off some steam. But let's end this with something
I hope
fun.
You don't have to edit too much.
Oh, no, and this is our longest episode, so I'm going to keep it long. Yeah.
Okay.
So, a little while back, right, you brought back some early 2000s nostalgia for me. You posted about the band Staind, and I tripped out a little bit. I'm like, fuck, Staind, I haven't heard about them in like a decade, right? And, I mean, talk to me a little bit about, like, your love for music of that era. I know, like, I'm talking specifically more like the early, late 90s, early 2000s. What were, like, some of your favorite bands, right? Talking about, like, that new metal, like, rap rock style of music, right?
Yeah. So, I graduated in 97. So, as I said, I was a grunge kid. So, my favorite bands still to this day are, like, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam. I was one of the people that cried and got depressed when Kurt Cobain killed himself. Like, I still don't believe he killed himself, by the way. I still believe he was murdered. I'm one of those people. Yeah. No disrespect, Courtney Love, but I'm just keeping it real. I think, but when I left high school and I started college, that was like those, the late 90s, early 2000s. And that's definitely when that new metal stuff started. So I fell right into play with like Linkin Park. I love Staind. My uncle actually was in a new metal band a few years back. He's been a long time bass player. He's been in several bands, but they did this they're called Dirty Machine. But anyways, their OG stuff was definitely like a take back on that new metal shit, man. They were like this hybrid mix of like Kornish and they did some Limp Bizkit covers. Like, they have their own music. It's just amazing shit. And I just really love that new metal feel because I feel like it's definitely this like amazing mix of like angst and depression, but like romanticism too. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
But it feels like that. It feels like that, that dark, but not like, it's like the dark, but not too dark. And it's the romantic, but not like the emo, like cheesy romantic. Right. It's just like that cool middle ground, right? And that's where I feel where new metal falls. And that's what I really love. Like Chevelle, I love them. But see, so like these are all like the bands that like I listen to, right? But my core is actually classic rock.
Yeah.
Like, I will listen to. Like if you were to look at my playlist right now, you would see such an eclectic mix of music, right? From Stained, Pearl Jam, Candlebox. I don't know if you remember Candlebox. That might be a little bit before you.
I heard some of their stuff before. I can't name the songs, but if I heard it, I'm like, I know that's Candlebox.
Yeah. That was me in high school, right? Frog Stomp, all of that. So I think that all of that, the modern music that I listen to is because of the classic rock base that I have, right? Zeppelin, the Doors. I listened to the Doors religiously through high school and in college. Janis Joplin, right? Jimi Hendrix. So these were all like the basis of what I grew up, more or less listening to it. But on the other end, right, also listening to stuff that my grandma raised me to listen to, right? Like the, who was it? The one who sings "They're Coming to America." What's his name again? No, the one who sings "Caroline." Sweet Caroline, that guy.
Oh, dang. Why am I drawing a blank here now?
Something Iglesias or something?
No.
I don't know. Anyways, so I grew up listening to all that Coast 103 shit, too, because my grandmother, that's all she ever listened to. But yeah, no, definitely Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Stained. I do love Hole, but I feel guilty listening to him because I'm more of a Nirvana person. And then I loved seeing what ended up happening after Nirvana obviously was no longer going into the Foo Fighters and shit. Like, oh man, definitely all over it.
Cool. And Foo Fighters kind of straddle that early 90s to like 2000s era as well. So for me, you mentioned that new metal / rap rock had kind of like this almost emo, almost like emotional, like love story type of romanticized thing. I kind of saw it as like it had this sound where it's just hardcore enough, but not like super metal, and it's just commercial enough, right? So it's a mix of the two. Where you can fucking bang your head and get crazy, but at the same time, everybody can enjoy it, and everybody did. And if they say they didn't, they're lying. Right? Yeah. Because everybody loved like Limp Bizkit and now all of a sudden they didn't. But everybody loved Kid Rock and now all of a sudden they don't.
Oh, loved him. Yeah. Loved him.
So I'm going to give you my top 5 of that era right now. I'm going to ask for yours. So in no particular order, my top 5 bands of that era were Korn, Limp Bizkit, Powerman 5000, Orgy, and Disturbed.
Okay. My top 5 during that era, definitely Linkin Park. Korn. Stained.
Nice.
The Foo Fighters.
Okay.
And the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah, and
even though I know the Red Hot Chili Peppers are kind of all over the place, but I really love them very much.
I think they've had so many different eras though, because they were actually late 80s, then they were early 90s, and then their sound changed for Californication because that was the sound of the 2000s.
And that was the album.
Yeah,
so that was the album that I loved during that time.
That was a perfect album. Like I listened to that over and over and over again, and I didn't mention them because if we're including Sublime and Red Hot Chili Peppers, then they knock they knock a couple of those bands right off.
Yes.
But definitely, I think they straddle that line between, and they're still making.
But to be honest with you, now it's funny because us as people, right? Like as you grow, and there's different genres of music that you listen to during different times of your life, right? So it's funny because when in those early 2000s in high school, I listened to a lot of the loud music. You know what I mean? Like, it was loud music, right? And then now my daughter tells me all the time, she's like, oh my God, your playlist puts me to sleep because it's all slow stuff. Like, it's weird, like how, you mutate as a person into what you listen to.
Mm-hmm. Like some bands, I didn't really have an appreciation for back then, like Slipknot, but like I really do now. I think they're one of my favorite bands today, like overall, right? And I think that this genre of music doesn't really get like the type of credit it deserves. Like I think there were so many good bands, and I don't know, I really enjoyed it, and I kind of hope it makes like a nostalgic comeback at some point. Moving on though, did you like go to many concerts back then?
No. So when I was in my early 20s, I think the only oh yeah, okay. So the concerts that I went to in my early 20s were actually in sync. So my cousin,
completely opposite.
Was totally opposite, and I ended up really liking them, which was so crazy. I went through this weird. There was like a 1 year period where like I lost my fucking mind, and like I went like totally outside of the box of what my normal genre of music is. And I had to take my cousin to an NSYNC concert, and I'm just going to tell you, NSYNC puts on a pretty badass concert. I'm not going to lie to you, okay? So I ended up loving, like, oh my God. And that was my first experience with NSYNC, and they were catchy, they were on the radio, you know, they were cute, and it was a fun concert. So I ended up really liking NSYNC for a while there. And then we went to another concert a year later, it was their next album, the Bye 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 tour. So those are the two, concerts that I went to during that time period that we're talking about. But the other concert that I had went to was the Journey concert, and that was when they didn't have the lead singer. They had already replaced him. So we drove out to, I don't know, a Honda Center or whatever, and we got all drunk and went to Journey because I grew up listening to Journey. I love Journey. And so that was like the concert that I participated in during that time. And then I didn't really start going to concerts again until probably maybe about 3 years ago when my uncle was playing at the Whiskey. I started going to the Whiskey Go-Go quite often for his band. And then the most recent one I went to was the Lana Del Rey concert. So she's my favorite.
So let's shotgun some quick answers here. Let's see what you've got. So I think you already mentioned your top 5 bands. So one of the new metal songs that you know all the lyrics to.
It's Been a While by Stained. Nice.
One guilty pleasure from that time frame. I'll give you mine real quick.
Oh.
I'll give you mine. Butterfly from, what was it that... The song was called Butterfly. It was a rip-off of a Red Hot Chili Peppers song.
I know which one you're talking about.
By Crazy Town.
Yes, by Crazy Town. Oh my God, I haven't heard that name in ages. Yes,
Am I embarrassed to say that I enjoy it? Slightly.
No.
Slightly.
I like that song too. So Guilty Pleasure. You know that one, every morning when I wake up,
Sugar Ray.
Sugar Ray.
Yeah,
They were a guilty pleasure for me.
It was, it was catchy. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, exactly. But when I look back on it now, I'm like, oh my God, that was so fucking lame. Yes.
Well, how about a band member, singer, guitar player, drummer, whatever, that maybe you had a crush on?
Oh, Chris Cornell.
Chris Cornell, okay. A band that
was quick, huh?
I was like, that was one of the first things you said. A band that you liked then, but you really can't stand now.
Oh. A band that I liked then, but I really can't stand now. Probably Limp Bizkit.
Like if you listen to Limp Bizkit now, you're like, eh. All right.
I'll change it.
A band everyone loved back then, but you hated.
Sugar Ray. No, that's not true. You want to know what everybody hated then? And no, what everybody loved and I hated? This is totally dating me. Not related to that genre of music, but Spice Girls. Everybody fucking loved the Spice Girls. Yeah. And I hated the Spice Girls.
Oh, man.
Hated them.
How about a band from that era that you still love, but everyone hates? The opposite.
Oh. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Like I still love Limp Bizkit. I still, every time every time they come on, like I'll listen to them. Like I'll turn it up because it's a Limp Bizkit song. I'm not embarrassed. I mean, I think Fred Durst is a fucking idiot, but
yeah,
let's say another band like that maybe fits that mold is like I won't listen to Creed out loud,
Oh, I have one. I really, oh no, that was the last question. I was going to say, I really loved POD back in the day, but I hate them now.
Really?
Yeah, I don't like them now. I don't like them at all. Like, I don't know if it's because like I've read articles on like, I just feel like they're wishy-washy. I can't think they're fake, but yeah. But I don't know about the other question. I'm not so sure.
I'm like, it was all in fun. But yeah, POD was opposite for me. Like I didn't like them at first, but then I grew to like them. But I guess different taste, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this was a great episode. I think we talked a lot of, good subjects, had some fun. Is there anything else you'd like to share on any of the topics at all?
No, just that, I think, like in regards to, everything that happened to YPI, I feel like everything happens for a reason, and I think for some people, they might already know, I think that there's good things that came from it. And I think that there's not so good things that came from it. And I think that the future still stands to hold more of an outcome of that situation. But I'm just really thankful that I even went through it now in hindsight, right? And I'm just thankful for where it has led me now and my current position and, the organization that I'm with. Like, I'm really feeling at home with them. And I did suffer for a while with PTSD and depression from what had happened because I felt like I lost my family, overnight. But I think that overall, all of us are stronger as a result of it. And I think that even like the field of expanded learning is going to be stronger as a result of it. So the fact that we were even a part of that, the fact that we're even contributing and a part of this historical time is exciting, I think. And I'm happy to see what manifests for all of us, right? When things are said and done. For sure. And we've, moved on. So yeah, but I appreciate you having me, Fabian. I think it's been fun. I hope I didn't get too crazy. I've never done something like this before.
Crazy's the best part. People love crazy. But,
awesome.
Do you have any shout outs or any plugs you want to make right
now? Nope. Just shout out to my OG YPI family and just, let's just keep fucking rocking it and be awesome because that's what we are.
There you go. All right, so the last thing I want to do, I have all my guests comment on the next episode. And the next episode is actually a little heavy. It's about surviving abuse, right? And so you see a lot of the times where people kind of hold that in, right? And it affects them, but they really don't let people know about it, right? Why do you think a lot of the times, people hide the abuse that they've been through, right? Like it could be physical abuse, sexual abuse, something like that. Why do you think people don't speak out more often? And then, how do you think it affects them?
I know quite a few abuse survivors, but I would say that I think that what really hinders people from speaking out is the lack of support, right? So I know that there's a lot of situations where people will speak out and say that they're being hurt and people don't believe them, right? Because it's easier not to believe the victim than to have to deal with the aftermath of that. So many young girls and boys are going to feel that despite having a nurturing relationship with an adult, right? So now put yourself in a situation where maybe they don't have a trusting, nurturing relationship with an adult. So if they don't have that, the likelihood of them speaking out is going to be so much lower, right? So I think that plays a big part in it, is having that trusting relationship with an adult to where you feel like I can be vulnerable and I can tell you this without the fear of not being believed. And we see that a lot with kids. Let's be real, right? I think we've all experienced students, hearing things. And then when I worked at the residential treatment facility for 5 years, those were girls that were not able to be in foster homes because they had even experienced abuse there, right? So I think that there's so many layers to that. But my immediate response is that I feel it has to do with whether you have a trusted adult that you feel like I can go to this person and tell this person. And that's why I think that for us in expanded learning and education period, like I tell my staff all the time, like we are those adults for our kids. Like we have to be the ones that they can trust and that they can come to, right? Not just us, but just period education, like teachers, expanded learning staff. Like we have to be those trusted adults for children. Because there's too many kids out there that are afraid to open their mouths because someone's not going to believe me, right? Because they're kids.
Yeah. Oh, good. Very good. Loaded answer. I mean, the next episode hopefully doesn't get too too heavy, but hopefully it does. Maybe it'll give people, a little bit of insight. But
I think people need to talk about those types of issues because until people have to talk about abuse to stop abuse. Because abuse isn't going to stop as long as people keep their mouths shut about it.
True. Well, thank you so much for being a part of this episode. Again, I think it was a great episode. I think people are going to get a good kick out of the stories we told, and hopefully some of our old colleagues get on there and listen.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Fabian, for having me. And it was great. And I look forward to, maybe we'll do it again in the future for different topics.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks so much, Fabian.
Thank you. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you. Fuck you and good night. Subscribe to the Ignorance is Strength podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Like, follow, and share on Facebook and Instagram at Ignorance is Strength Podcast and on Twitter at The Ignorance Pod.